Welcome, everybody, to MasterClass Live. It is a new offering that we're providing to our members, which allows them to interact directly with our instructors. In light of the current climate, it's a member-only offering that we're actually allowing everybody to access for the foreseeable future. For those of you who are not familiar with MasterClass, we are an online learning platform which enables anybody to learn from the best. We have a catalog of over 80 classes with industry leaders like Martin Scorsese, Gordon Ramsay, Serena Williams, and the list goes on. My name is Davis. I am a senior creative producer here at MasterClass. And joining us today is none other than Dan Brown. Dan, thank you for joining us.
Great to see you again. I'm looking
I
forward to
know.
it.
It's such a pleasure. Dan needs no introduction, but he is an incredibly talented and successful writer. He's also an all-around awesome guy. And we welcomed him to the MasterClass family not too long ago with a class that he taught on writing thrillers. And so Dan, I'd love to just kind of start off by asking you what your favorite part of having your class out in the world is.
Well, it's, ever since the Da Vinci Code came out, I've had a lot of people asking me, hey, how do you write a thriller? And now I can just say, go watch my masterclass, and I can just go back to writing. I don't need to spend days and days trying to explain whatever my theories may be on that.
Yeah, easy, done and done. Well, I'm glad we could help you with that.
Thank you very much.
So that actually kind of leads me into another question that I wanted to ask you. And so as a producer, I can't help but look at the comments in the classes that I make to see what people think. And it's been really awesome to see the impact that your class has had on everybody. They seem to really love it. And one of the things that the members seem to find particularly empowering is your thesis around protecting the process. And so I'd love, not everybody has seen it, but I'd love if you could just kind of give us a couple points on what that is. But then I'm also interested in how that's translated into the time we find ourselves in at this moment.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, process is critical now more than ever. So I have a little sign over my computer that says protect the process and the results will take care of themselves. And what I mean by that, a lot of people think that writing a novel is 90% inspiration and 10% perspiration. It's actually the reverse. Writing a novel is about a routine. It's one thing if you're writing a song or a short poem or creating a gourmet meal, all of which take incredible skill, but are over fairly quickly. Writing a novel is a massive undertaking. And in order to do it, you need to do it as close to every day as you can. And so when I talk about the process, I'm really talking about really two things: where you write and when you write. Now, when you write, it's really up to you. It doesn't matter. Most writers I know write in the morning. I write in the morning at 4 a.m. every morning, which may seem insane, but that's a great time of day because nobody's writing you email and nobody's bothering you. You can really write whenever you want, but I would suggest that you make it the same time every day, that you make it a time when you've got some energy in the tank and you might be inspired. The most important thing, though, really is where you write, creating that space in which to be creative. For me, I have no email, no phone, really no distractions. That for me is absolutely critical. And some people say, well, geez, I live in an apartment with 3 kids and, it's very, very hard to find a place with no distractions. I talked to a student shortly after the masterclass came out who met me at a book signing and asked me that. And she was a young woman who was married and had a child, had nowhere to go. And she ended up going down into the basement of their apartment building and sitting in her car with a laptop in the passenger seat with her coffee at 5 o'clock every morning for 1 hour. And she's halfway through a novel. That's about protecting your process. I didn't know we were going to get into process quite this fast, but I brought something. So for all of you, this is to show how great a guy Davis is and how fun it was to work with MasterClass. This is what they gave me as a gift, as a parting gift: protect the process. And this actually is hanging, not at the moment, obviously, but in my bedroom, such as the first thing I see as I leave my bedroom in the morning, saying, that's right, protect the process. I'm going to work right now.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad that it didn't go in a closet somewhere.
It's going back in my room immediately.
Great. Well, thank you. And so, I mean, there are so many, I can imagine that there are so many distractions now more than ever. for people that are trying to be creative or do any work for that matter. And I'm curious, have you ever found yourself in a situation like this before? Because it's like there's so many distractions. It's easy to not be distracted by like push notifications when there's nothing
Sure.
crazy going on in the world. But like, you know.
Well, part of it is the amount of media that's happening, and I just tune that out. But part of it on a more philosophical level is trying to convince yourself that what you're doing has any relevance. I mean, in the real world. Now, I should tell you, I don't know if I mentioned this in the class, in the master class, but when I was writing the Da Vinci Code, as Robert Langdon is arriving at Lee Teabing's house, Chateau Villette, the Twin Towers came down. And I remember that very, very clearly, remembering the days and weeks after that, trying to find relevance. I said, look, I'm moving imaginary characters through an imaginary landscape. There are people suffering. There's this terrible thing that's happened. How is this relevant? And in a strange way, and I think it's relevant to what we're going through right now, you need to almost see the chaos in the world as a kind of impetus to focus on your imaginary world. The world right now is kind of chaotic and kind of a mess. And I consider myself lucky to spend a good portion of my day in a world that I get to control. that's not quite so chaotic. It of course is for Robert Langdon, but for the rest of us, it's not that chaotic. So I would say, at the risk of sounding cliche, take lemons and make lemonade. Really let the chaos of the real world be the impetus to fold in on yourself and spend some time in that imaginary world.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious also, like I read recently that a lot of seminal works were created in times kind of just like these. And like, for example, like Shakespeare and Sir Isaac Newton, who makes an appearance in the Da Vinci Code, if I remember correctly.
Yes, he does.
Made some of their seminal works in times like these. And I'd be curious if you had any thoughts on why that might be.
I think that the skeptic in me would say, like, hey, look, at the time that Shakespeare and Isaac Newton were working, the world was a pretty bad place. And so just by nature of probability, some great things are going to happen during lousy times. Mm-hmm. The romantic in me would say, yeah, I think that there's something to be said for that. That, the stronger the wind blows, the tougher the tree has to be. One of the problems of writing in a really comfortable setting is that it's hard to convince yourself to do any work. You're just too comfortable. And this will sound very, very strange, but it is very honest. In some ways, it was easier for me to write when I was a starving writer. Mm-hmm. I had a book deal and I had to get this book out or else I wouldn't be able to pay my rent. And at some point you realize, like, wow, okay, I've been very fortunate. I've had some success. Technically, I don't have to write another book. And you're sitting there at 4 o'clock in the morning saying, what am I doing? Mm-hmm. So I guess that the simplest way to put it is that it's easier to write sitting on a bed of nails than sitting in a bed eating bonbons. So don't try sitting on a bed of nails, but find that middle ground where you say, this is important to me and it's okay to be a little uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And I should mention also, I think this is something I mentioned in the masterclass. If not, this is a little bonus, but I wrote a 100-page outline for the Da Vinci Code. And at the time, I was visiting my parents in Florida, mm-hmm. and we were in a small house. My brother was there. The nephews were there. It was absolute chaos. And I had nowhere to write. And I ended up writing the outline for the Da Vinci Code in my parents' laundry room, with laundry going beside me most of the time, sitting on 2 milk crates with a laptop on an ironing board. Mm-hmm. And that is a true story. And that's about saying, look, you want to protect your process, you find that spot that can be private and don't take yourself too seriously. If you got to sit on a milk carton, just do it. That's the important thing, is the process. Yeah.
And not to like overstate it, but there was something that was coming to mind. It's almost kind of like writing as though your life depends on it a little bit. Like that's dramatic, but make it important to yourself.
It has to be a priority. And people say, how do I know if I'm good enough? Sometimes I don't know what to write. I say, I'm not worried if you don't know what to write. I'm worried if you can't get up and put yourself in that chair every day at the same time and say, this is important to me.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So I have another question, which is, I'd be curious to know if you think, for the creative output that you think is going to come out of this period that we find ourselves in, if you think that what's happening right now might find its way into it, both like in an
Oh,
literal way, like there might be more and more works about what's currently happening. And there might be, I was more interestingly, if the climate might kind of seep in around the edges of the art that's created.
I I believe you're right. I think that is definitely going to happen. It's already happening in the novel that I'm working on. Um, I'd love to write a novel about a virus, but I already did it, and a few years ago in Inferno. I'm not going to do it again. But it's interesting. I don't do many Zoom calls or Skype calls face to face, and the fact that I've had to do so many uh, has seeped into the novel that I'm writing now. And there is a character who is a red herring who really communicates with Langdon only through Skype
Mm-hmm.
or Zoom or one of these platforms. And we start to realize, like, wait a minute, how do we know he is where he really is? There's a white wall behind him. And that is an idea that I wouldn't have had if it weren't for this current environment.
Mm-hmm.
And when this novel finally comes out, there is a restaurant that closes because there is a pandemic and the restaurant has to close. And this way, a character was able to rent the space. And those are two sort of immediate examples of something I'm writing right now that is influenced by what's happening around us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. I had another question, which is like, I know that you're currently working on another book, and was curious if there was any light you might be able to shed on it. I know that they are very secretive. It's probably all very hush hush.
Yeah, there will be no light. There will be nothing but darkness. No, actually, there is probably one. There's probably one thing I can share. And for anybody who's read my books out there, you know that Robert Langdon is a consummate bachelor. He's single. He likes his time alone. But very conveniently, at the beginning of every novel, he meets a beautiful woman who is either a physicist or an entanglement scientist or a cryptologist, somebody who has all of the skills that he needs to solve this mystery. He's been very fortunate that way. But at the beginning of this book, he is no longer a bachelor. He is in a committed relationship and has been for a number of years. He's head over heels in love. And the woman with whom he is in love is a character from one of my previous novels. And that's all I can say. That's entirely too much. I'll probably get in trouble for saying that, but there we
you
have
won't tell anybody except for the entire live
Is anybody
audience.
watching? I mean, I just feel like I'm talking to you. I'm not sure anybody's out there.
I think there's probably a couple.
Okay.
Well, great. So thank you. And so for those of you who are just joining us, we have Dan Brown here for a MasterClass live event. And he totally just spilled the beans on his entire next novel. It's a bummer you missed it because he's never going to say it again. Yep. No, but actually this, a recording of this, for those of you just joining, a recording of this will be available in just a few hours after we end. So you will have a chance to kind of backtrack and take a look if you'd like. So I'd love to stop asking questions myself and open the door to the MasterClass members who are what this is all about.
Great.
What's exciting about what we're doing with you is that this is the first time that we're ever inviting your members, the members of your class, to join us live and ask their questions face-to-face or virtually.
Okay.
And so we put the word out to your members just a few days ago that we were going to be doing this, and we got a ton of responses. People are really enthusiastic about this opportunity. So that's what we're going to do right now. And also for everybody at home, and both Dan and everybody at home, this is the first time we're doing it. Please bear with us if there are any technical issues. We're still working out the kinks, but we hope you enjoy it. So first up, we have Jin, who's joining us all the way from Singapore.
Singapore.
Mm-hmm.
What time is it in Singapore? We will ask Jin.
Yeah, we'll have to ask her.
Hi, Jin.
Hi, Dan. Hi, I'm Jing from Singapore. It's actually 8 a.m., so it's not too bad.
8 a.m. Okay. Well, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. So I really enjoyed your class. Thank you so much. I found it really practical and useful. And my question to you is, now that you're you have so many best-selling novels under your belt, if there was anything you wished you could unlearn from about writing.
Wish that I could unlearn?
Yeah, about writing.
Okay, that is a great question. I've never been asked that question. Okay, yes, there is one thing. One thing I have learned in the process of writing novels is that the first 50 pages are the hardest, and they're really not a lot of fun. The books are much more fun to write after the first 50 pages, and I wish I could unlearn that. because knowing how hard it is to write the first 50 pages, I really procrastinate in starting a novel. I research a little more than I probably should. So if I could unlearn that, I would probably write a little bit faster.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jing. So next up, we have another international person joining us. Well, international to you and I in the United States. So this is Slovak, and he's joining from Poland.
Hey, Dan.
Hello, Slovak.
Hey, nice to meet you. It's 2 a.m. in Poland, so happy to be here.
You are committed.
Of course. So nice to meet you. My question is, what would be your advice to less experienced writers who think that all stories have already been told and no story actually is fresh and interesting still?
Wow. Well, the first thing I would say is this not very experienced writer has a very good sense of story, because you are absolutely correct. Every story has been told. And as an example, I always say, well, look at the books of Ian Fleming, James Bond, or the movies. If you haven't read the books, we all know James Bond is going to get the girl and defuse the bomb and kill the villain. The story's been told 100 times. We don't worry about whether or not that's going to happen. We worry how it's going to happen. So what I would say is, first of all, you're right. Whatever story you're writing has been told. In the book Inferno, there's a virus that gets out, and will the hero stop the world from ending? And of course, we know Langdon will save the day somehow. People read the book to find out how he saves the day. So I would encourage this writer, if it happens to be you, not to worry if the story in its basic form seems like it's been done, because you're right, it has been done. What you get is a template on which to add your creativity and your imagination. That's the fun part. You say, like, I've got to get this character from here to here. We all know he's going to get there. Make it an interesting, wonderful pathway. Put as many obstacles in the way as possible and find the most creative ways around those obstacles that you possibly can. And good luck. And you should go to bed now.
Thank you, Slovak. Slavic's question brought something else up for me as well, which is there's a toolkit that every writer has, which is their own unique creative voice as well. Sure. It's kind of what separates Saving Private Ryan from Inglourious Basterds, for example. So anyway, so now we have Malika, who's joining us from India.
Hi, Dan. It's such a pleasure speaking to you. I've loved reading your books, and I've thoroughly enjoyed your masterclass and learned a lot, which is immensely useful. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
My question to you today is, if I were writing nonfiction in the format of a thriller, and I wanted to introduce the elements you've spoken about, like the 3 C's that would make a thriller more interesting or make a thriller work, how much creative liberty do I have as a writer when I'm working with nonfiction, historical nonfiction to be specific? And I want to add in elements like bringing in suspense, compressed time, all the elements that you've spoken about.
Sure.
But I'm writing nonfiction essentially. How much creative liberty do I have? Do you have some sort of guideline you can give for writers?
I have a very succinct guideline. Be honest. You have to be honest with your reader. You can do whatever you want in your book as long as you're being honest. If you're writing historical fiction and taking liberties, you make that clear. Whether you do it in the way that you're writing, or you do it with a note to your readers, or you do it with the fact that you say, like, look, I'm writing a novel based on history. Now, if you're writing history, factual nonfiction history, you have to be very, very accurate, absolutely accurate, or else you'll lose all credibility. If you're writing history and you want to incorporate a contract, a crucible, a ticking clock, all of these things, you have one very, very important decision to make. What story are you choosing to tell? If you want to write a piece of history that reads like a thriller, and you are bound by what actually happened, you better choose a pretty thrilling story, or else it's going to be very, very hard to do, because you've tied your hands, being unable to sort of expand on what actually happened. So choose a good topic and be honest with your reader.
And Dan, so for those at home, are you able to give some of the bullet points of what the 3 C's are?
Sure. Yeah, okay. I always talk about the 3 C's when I'm talking to writing students, and even to myself, that the 3 C's are the clock, the crucible, and the contract. Now, the clock is really just, it means time pressure, a ticking clock. You know, the simplest example is Angels and Demons. There's antimatter in the Vatican, and at midnight it's going to blow up. Very, very simple, but we know that there's time pressure, so Langdon has to hurry. And when you read thrillers, you'll find out there's always time pressure. It may not be as trite and obvious as antimatter blowing up at midnight on the nose. That's a very specific ticking clock. It may be, hey, this person is leaving town tomorrow and needs to decide whether or not he's going to stay with the woman he's just met or go back to his family. That's Bridges of Madison County. A different kind of thriller, always a ticking clock. The crucible essentially is a box that encloses the action and the characters, and doesn't let them run away. And as an example, I always say the end of the novel Jaws by Peter Benchley, actually it's the end of the movie I'm referring to specifically, where the boat is sinking, the shark is coming toward the boat, they're in the middle of the ocean without a radio, they can't run away. It is a crucible, and they have to deal with the monster coming after them. If, for example, there'd been a lifeboat with a motor that they could jump in and just drive away, suddenly you don't have a thriller, you have a bad scene. So compact, really restrain your characters and make them face their demons. The other is the contract. Contract just means a promise to your readers. Every page should be a promise to your reader. And as a thriller writer, really as any writer, you should be constantly reminding your reader, I know something you don't know. And if you turn the page, I promise I will tell you. I promise whatever I'm withholding will eventually be laid bare. And if I do my job correctly, it will be laid bare in a way you don't see coming. You're gonna be excited and surprised by the way it happens. So those are the 3 C's, and I feel like every good story, thriller or non-thriller, needs some element of all of those.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And so now we have Tracy.
Hi, Dan. I'm really excited to be part of this MasterClass Live. And my question is about first person, third person, and point of view. Can you talk a little bit more about how you maneuver this in your writing? Other authors talk about how it's hard to change point of view in the middle of the story, but your books seem to make it look effortless. And also, is it something that you think about during your outline, or do you wait until your first draft to start playing with point of view?
All right. I love you for asking me about point of view. Thank you. Point of view is so critical. And you're right. People say it's very, very hard to move in and out of point of view. The answer is yes, it is hard to move in and out, which is why I never do it. If you have read my novels, you will see that every single chapter is told from a very specific point of view. One of the characters, I choose a character and I stick with it for the whole chapter. Now and then, very rarely, I will have to change points of view halfway through a chapter, and you will see there is a section break with little asterisks saying, this is a different section. So what withholding point of view can do, or restraining it to a single character, is it lets you play fair with the reader and withhold information. So if you're an omniscient narrator and you're floating from one head to the next, two things happen. One is you kind of need, if somebody's holding a secret, you kind of owe it to the reader, if you can see inside that person's head, to tell them the secret. So when somebody has a secret, I write from the other guy's point of view, such that we don't get that yet. Okay? So the other danger in writing omniscient narrator and just sort of floating in and out is that the reader's experience is very disjointed. They feel like they're hovering over the action. If you in your own writing decide, I am writing this chapter from this character's point of view, and you withhold it only to what that character can see and know, the reader has the experience of being behind that character's eyes and being part of that character. So the question is, how do you choose which character? Simple rule of thumb is whichever character has the most to lose, that's the one you write from. Whoever's in danger, whoever's just discovered something upsetting, whoever's most emotionally stimulated, that's a good place to start. Not a perfect rule. I often end up writing scenes from multiple points of view, trying one, I'll write a scene maybe from 3 different characters' points of view, just to find out which way it works best. Great question.
Thank you, Tracy. So next up, we have CL joining us from Indiana. Hi, CL.
Hello. Hi, Dan.
Hi there.
Your masterclass has changed my writing for the better exponentially. It's wonderful. In your class, specifically Life as a Writer, you talk about your first book signing and how it didn't quite go as you had imagined it. But I'd like to back up just a little bit earlier in a writer's career for my question. I understand not every author can reach Dan Brown's status, but for those of us whose goal it is to do that, how do we stay motivated after years of rejection from agents and publishers? And is there ever a point where we should just accept that maybe we don't possess that caliber of talent? Thank you.
I'm going to answer this all in reverse. Really fascinating question. Is there a moment that you should accept you don't have the talent? The only moment that I would ever accept someone doesn't have the talent is the moment they say, you know what, I can't force myself to sit down and write. If you can get up, sit down and feel motivated to write, you are nowhere near the end of your ability. It's funny, doing this masterclass really taught me that writing is a learned process. As I put together the curriculum with Davis, I thought, like, well, all of these things that I'm sharing in this class are things I learned along the way. I didn't just I wasn't born knowing this. I learned it by making mistakes, by reading writers who do it much better than I do and saying, like, wow, I love the way they do that. I want to pull that into what I do. So how do you stay motivated? You stay motivated the same way a violinist who's learning scale stays motivated. I want to do this better tomorrow. I want this chapter to read better tomorrow. I want to find a more interesting way to get the person from here to there. That's how I stay motivated. At the end of every novel, I'm like, oh, how could I possibly write something that has that many twists and turns? Again, because I'm going to have to do it a little better next time. And you take it as a challenge, and you become inspired to just get better and better. And I will tell you, as far as publishers and editors and agents and all of that, we live in an amazing time. 10 years ago, if you wanted to share your writing with the world, you needed to convince an agent and a publisher and probably a staff of publishers to take a chance on you, invest in you, and publish your book. Now, with the world we live in, you have an international publishing deal on the computer that you're sitting in front of right now, on the computer you work on. You can share your writing through blogs, through through all sorts of, through electronic publishing, through, you can even say, you know what, I'm going to take a few $100s and I'm going to print 50 copies of my book and I'm going to give them to friends. And I want to hear what they think about it. And you know what, the way so many writers have gotten started is to self-publish, go to your local bookstore and say, like, can you just take these on consignment? Become your own publicist. Try to develop a little bit of a groundswell, because when you do, publishers will take notice. If you start selling a lot of ebooks, or go back to print your next 500 books because they've sold, publishers will take notice. So let yourself be inspired by just getting better. Okay, it is not easy, and trust me. You say not everybody gets to Dan Brown status. Well, there are days that I don't feel like somebody who's written a bunch of books that sold a few copies. I feel like someone who has no idea which way is up. I'm facing a blank page. What do I do? And that's the moment you sort of step back and you say, no, wait, I'm protecting my process. I'm just doing it better than I did yesterday. Good luck. Don't give up.
Thank you, CL. All right, next up, we have Bobby joining us.
Hi, Dan. How you doing?
Hey, Bobby.
Hi. So I'm big into plot twists in my writing, and I was just curious, what aspects of life do you use as inspiration for twists in your stories?
Oh, well, I use a lot of travel and a lot of reading. I like the real world inspires me. When I travel and I, for example, see the passetto that leads from Castle St. Angelo to the Vatican, and I find out it was used by popes to escape their enemies, I say, wow, what a great thing to use in a novel, and I will use that as a twist. How do you get out of Castle St. Angelo and back to the Vatican? Well, that's the tunnel you're going to use. When I was writing Origin, I had decided, I don't know if you've read Origin, but there's a villain in it who, of course, Langdon has to dispense with eventually. I had written the scene where Langdon kills him, and I was back at Sagrada Familia in Barcelona and saw something I hadn't seen on one of my first visits, and it was this terrifying spiral staircase. And I thought, wow, that's a much more interesting death than the one I've already written. So I went back and rewrote the scene to die there. So my inspiration is the real world. If you can't travel, read as much as you can. We're all sort of internet traveling at the moment, but thanks to technology, we have the luxury to do that. And is that a painting behind you, or that is very cool? Or is it a quilt? What is that? Okay, all right, very cool.
Thank you very much. All right, next up we have Cindy joining us.
Hi. I think
Hi,
you have
Cindy.
the wrong Cindy. I'm back.
Hey, you look really familiar. Are you done yet? Oh, that's funny.
And it is the luxury of live television, okay. Quote unquote. Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess we'll give Cindy another moment.
Yeah. And it could also be that. Oh, hey, there she is.
Yeah, there we go. Hi there.
Dan, biggest fan here, not only of your writing, but of your class. So thank you so much for being with us today. It means a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I know in the past you've mentioned using inversion therapy as a way of jumpstarting creativity. So I'm wondering if you have any other tricks or exercises that you do or practice to jolt yourself back into creativity and imagination.
Yeah. What I said earlier, I read a ton and I travel a lot, and I'm stimulated by the real world. But as far as tricks, I hope this doesn't sound like I'm dodging the question, because I'm absolutely not. I think that nature abhors a vacuum. I think that the way you spark creativity is to empty your mind. I meditate every day. I take long walks in the woods with my dog, who fortunately is very quiet and doesn't talk to me. And I am able to just empty my mind. And it is really in those moments of nothing here that ideas jump in. I find it very, very hard to watch the news, read other novels. I'll read nonfiction to be stimulated with ideas. I don't read any fiction when I'm writing. I would encourage you to empty your mind as much as you can, which is hard right now. Just turn off the television, meditate, or just whatever, walk the beach, walk the streets, whatever calms you down and lets you just be blank. You'll be amazed what happens to an empty mind. It doesn't like being empty. It will make something to fill itself up. So.
Thank you, Cindy. Cindy with an S. Thank you very much.
Cindy with an S.
Yes.
Nice to meet you.
All right. Next up, we have Wally from Arizona. Hey, Wally.
There we go. Hi, Dan. Thank you so much for being here. I'm enjoying this immensely.
Oh, my pleasure.
Hey, I have a question. It's really another question about protecting your process. When you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to start writing again, do you start by reading what you read, what you wrote the previous day? And if so, how do you resist the temptation to start editing that and tweaking it and making changes to it and get caught up in that rather than moving forward?
All right, you speak from experience, okay?
Yes.
you and I have the same problem, and a lot of writers have this problem, and it's called reading what you already wrote is easier than writing something new. That's what the problem's called. So I have a lot of tricks because I absolutely fall into that. And if I go back too far, I'll just start editing what I wrote yesterday. And the problem with editing immediately is that you really don't have perspective. You need a few days to come back to something before you can truly edit it. Because if you don't, what you do is you start editing, and after half an hour on one paragraph, you realize it's exactly what you wrote 30 minutes ago. You've changed it and gotten all the way back to where you started. So it's sort of a futile exercise. A couple tips I can offer you. One is I call it setting the table for breakfast. When I leave work, which is 10, 11, 12, on a good day, maybe 1 o'clock, I will write the paragraph that starts whatever I'm writing the next day, such that when I arrive to work the next morning, the engine's already running, and I don't sort of have this temptation to go back and look farther back. Oftentimes it will be the end of a chapter, and I'll start with the opening paragraph, the new chapter. Say, look, chapter 10, yes, it needs to be edited. You'll do that in a few days. Just leave it alone. You're on chapter 11, and the engine's running. And if you've written a good opening paragraph, you read it and go like, oh, good, okay, here we go. You know which way to go. The other thing I do, which I don't think I've ever admitted this, but you asked such an honest question. I'm going to give you a very honest answer. It is hard to resist going back and reading. So what I sometimes do, I write with white text on a blue background. If the text has gotten to the point where it's pretty good and I find that I'm reading it over and over, I select all of it and I make it blue so I can't see it. That is embarrassing for someone who has written a few books. I should be able to resist that temptation, but sometimes I have to do that if I just find myself going back over it. So learn how to use colors on your word processor and just trick yourself into thinking it's not there.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. Next, we have Sarah from California.
Hi there. Thanks for taking the time today. Actually, some of your advice is really helpful in my day job, so I really appreciate, especially like trusting. I train horses, so it's very important. The process is very important, and it's easy to forget sometimes. So very helpful.
Wonderful. My
question is, your novels are very conspiracy based. Do you personally believe in conspiracy theories?
I'm more of a skeptic. I, for example, don't believe UFOs are visiting us. I mean, I may be proven wrong on that one, but I tend to be more of a skeptic. I do believe, however, that there are hidden reasons that things happen. I think that the news that we hear is really not even close to the whole story. And that's, I guess we think of conspiracy as a bad thing. Conspire, the word conspire means to breathe together, people coming together in a hushed way and achieving something. I think that happens all the time behind the scenes. I don't think it's always a bad thing. So yes, I believe that conspiracy occurs. A lot of the most popular conspiracy theories I quietly disregard and don't give much credence to. I hope I've answered your question. You sound like you might be a conspiracy theorist, so I'm a little bit more of a skeptic. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Sarah. So that wraps up the live student question segment of our MasterClass Live. We do have a couple
great questions.
They had some really.
And some of them were doing it at 2 o'clock in the morning. So that's impressive.
Fans all over the place. It's great.
Okay.
So we do have a couple questions from other students that were not able to join us that we also wanted to run by you.
Okay.
And also for everybody out there who has just joining us or joined us just a little bit ago, we're doing a MasterClass Live with Dan Brown, and he is talking about all things writing thrillers, all that great stuff. So the next question that we have came from Sophia, and she said, successfully misdirecting readers with red herrings can be really challenging, but it's something that you do very well. what is your philosophy on the best way to get readers looking in the wrong direction?
Well, that is certainly your job as a thriller writer. I mean, you always want people looking in the wrong direction. You want the truth to hit them on the side of the head, and they don't see it coming until maybe the line before. So red herrings are absolutely critical. Most thrillers involve the question, like, who's behind this? Like who's the killer? Who's the person pulling the strings? Who's this puppet master that's making everything happen? Before I answer the question, I'll just mention, I know I mentioned this in MasterClass, but I just have to tell the story. In Da Vinci Code, for those of you who've read it, there's a character, Bishop Aringarosa, and he looks guilty for an enormous part of the novel. And he is very much a red herring. And I should tell you that his last name, Aringarosa, is built up of two Italian words, Aringa, meaning herring, and Rosa, meaning red. He's literally Bishop Red Herring. And I always thought, I don't know, I mean, you do all sorts of crazy stuff to amuse yourself in a 2 or 3 year writing process. I always figured I'd change his name at the end, and I just sort of liked it and I left it. As far as creating red herrings, I'll just speak very specifically to that. The best way to do it is never to underestimate your reader. Your readers are very smart people, and they will be reading a novel thinking, okay, so the author just shone a spotlight on this person saying, you know, and the person's acting suspicious. That is the person the author wants me to think it is. That's a red herring. But I'm a smart reader. I'm not going to buy that. You have to create a second character that's over here that maybe in a stretch could have done it, but you don't really see the motivation. You're not sure. But the smart reader is going to say, that's the guy. That's the guy I'm not supposed to see coming. And then you have to create a third character who really did it that nobody imagined, and it just comes out of left field. Now, it's absolutely critical that you lay the groundwork such that when the reader finds out who the red herring is, they don't say, what? They say, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't see that. It was right in front of me the whole time. You have to be fair to the reader. You have to give them enough clues and enough backstory that it's not a character that just sort of appears out of nowhere. It's somebody we've been dealing with. So that's absolutely critical. It has to be the Hercule Poirot scene in all the Agatha Christie books where he says, let me tell you what really happened. And she does it so well that you go like, of course that's what happened. It's the only way it could have happened. Why didn't I see it? That's the job.
And so I'm curious, were there any examples that you can remember where you were rereading and you knew this is the person that was the ultimate villain, let's say, and you were like, but the groundwork is just not there, like, or
Yes.
maybe too much. You're like, this is way too evident. This is
Yeah.
is now the spotlight person.
Yes. I don't want to give too much away, but Origin was very much that. If you've for those of you who've read Origin, there's a number of characters that are very sort of different kinds of characters. One in particular that's very different. And creating that book had a number of red herrings, had maybe 3. And if I did my job correctly, and for most of the readers I've talked to, they were surprised by the twist at the end and thought, of course, that's how it happened. So I feel, but in the process of writing that, it was such a big twist. I wanted to be absolutely sure that I was being fair to the reader, such that when I delivered it, the reader would say, oh my God, of course, that and that and that and that. And that's why we have editors who can go through and say like, hey, look, you tipped your hat a little too far. I figured it out in chapter 27. You don't want it until chapter 100. And this was the only moment that I thought, oh my God, you need to take that out because a smart reader is going to put it together too soon.
Gotcha.
It is very important to have perspective on your work. And you get that in only 2 ways. One is taking a lot of time away from it and coming back. Do not read it on a computer. Print it out on paper the way somebody's going to read it. Take it out of your office. Take it to the park. Take it to the beach, wherever you're going, and read it as if you've never read it before. That's one way. The other way is to ask a friend or a parent or an editor or whoever, a child you think is smart, whoever it is, get somebody else to read it and ask them, hey, who do you think did it and why?
Yeah.
And they will give you very, very good clues as to whether you're hitting the nail too hard or you're missing it entirely.
Yeah. And it also sounds like there's a little bit of maybe not overwriting it, but when you're first starting out, making sure that the clues are there such that they can be followed logically. And then you can whittle away a little bit maybe. And you're like, no, I don't need this one. No, I don't need this one. No, I don't need this one.
Exactly right. Very much the Michelangelo way of sculpting. You know, you start with a big block and you take things away. It's much easier to take things away than it is to add things.
Yep.
And I always overwrite. You know, an 8-page chapter. My first draft is 8 pages, and my final draft is 4 pages. You're always taking away.
Cool. So the next question is about, it's a Dan Brown special. So it's from Ned, and it seems like almost every one of your chapters ends on a cliffhanger. How do you keep them from becoming redundant or stale?
Well, I think the easiest way to answer that is I'm always trying to get out of a scene before it's over. You know, good movie directors, they say they come into a scene late and they get out early. Meaning, rather than a scene in a novel where 2 people are walking down the street and they come together and say like, "Hi, how are you?" and you get to all the pleasantries, and 5 minutes into the conversation they say, "What, you were at that party?" You start with the line, "What, you were at that party?" And you know, we've been talking for 5 minutes and I just learned it, and boom, you're right into the action. The same for the ending, for cliffhangers. Rather than tying things up in a nice little bow, you get out before the bow is tied up, such that the person says, "Oh, well, I've got this half-open package and I'm going to need to actually turn the page to the next chapter to find out what happens." And then they get to the next chapter and it's actually tying up the bow from a chapter 3 times ago. And so you get these parallel plot lines that are woven together such that there's always something you don't know. You're simultaneously solving a problem and posing a problem. You don't want to frustrate your reader by having too many cliffhangers and not solving problems. You want them to feel like things are clear and they're making progress, but you're constantly introducing new questions as you go, or else things do start to feel stale.
That's really interesting. I hadn't really ever thought about, you know, because you do think about the cliffhanger, but you don't necessarily think about like the preceding content quite as much. And so it's almost like there's an art to cliffhangers, which is 1, crafting the right one, but also 2, having enough kind of like tension and release leading up to them so that they remain satisfying. Or I guess
absolutely. And, you know, I grew up, my mom was a professional musician, and I grew up as a musician, spent a lot of time making music, studying music. And when and also I did a lot of creative writing as a kid. And we didn't have a TV, actually, when I grew up. My parents didn't want to have a TV. They wanted me to read. Yeah. So, you know, and they said, I said, "This is crazy. I've got imaginary friends. You know, this is, I'm a very strange child." And now they said, "Well, it worked out." Okay. So now I talk to my imaginary friends every day and I write stories. But, and you're just going to have to remind me what we were talking about. Cliffhangers.
With the tension release.
Music. Writing books is a lot like writing music. Good stories, even good paragraphs, have tension and release in the same way that a musical line will ask a question and then give an answer. Writing is about tempo, about keeping the right pace, about varying the pace. A great symphony has fast parts and slow parts, changing the timbre, the orchestration. All of that is very, very similar to music. And so the idea of a cliffhanger is a musical leading tone. It's that thing that makes you go like, "Oh, give me the tonic, give me the resolution of this chord," but just not giving it to them yet. So
wonderful. So our last question is from Phoebe. She said, during your course, you entered and exited through what appeared to be a secret passageway through a bookshelf. Is this really in your home? And if so, where does it lead?
Wow. That's the last question? That's a pretty direct question. Yes, it is really in my home. In fact, it is right behind me. Let's see if I can, right there behind Simon.
Behind the bust.
And I guess I could, we're all friends. I could just take you through that door, right? I can show you where it leads.
If you are,
and we're out of time.
Oh, yeah.
And that's suspense. I mean, we'll do it again, and next time we'll go in.
Now I'm in. Yeah, I'm even more intrigued. I'll be there. I'll read that next chapter for sure.
I'm not sure I can get through it.
No, it's all right. I think Wi-Fi. I mean, you're probably plugged in and all different kinds.
I think it would be a fiasco, and we've had such a nice time.
But next time.
Next time for sure. I'll be unplugged, and we'll journey into the other dimension that is behind that door.
Great. Well, so that brings us to the end of our live session with you, Dan. Is there anything else you want to say to our people watching?
You know what? I guess I would just say that if you are not a member of MasterClass, it is the most wonderful concept and execution of a teaching platform that I've ever seen. And I'm a terrible chef, for example. I'm an awful cook, but I appreciate food. And I've watched some cooking classes not to learn how to cook, but to appreciate what I'm eating. I've watched some athletic classes, not because I'm a great athlete, but because I'm fascinated by what it takes to get your body to do some of these things that people can do. So I guess I would say, especially now in this world where we're home a lot more, and our connection with the outer world is virtual. You know, I don't mean to pitch your platform, but I'm just so impressed with what you guys do, and I've so enjoyed the other classes you have. I would encourage people to get out there and learn some things that they haven't known about. And who knows, you know, you might end up watching a cooking class and writing a thriller about a chef in a restaurant who, you know, whatever it is. So let the classes inspire you and inspire your writing in the process.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. We are honored. And it's, I mean, it's such high praise coming from you. We really appreciate it. So now, just before we take off, as a reminder, MasterClass Live will take place every Wednesday. So be sure to tune in next Wednesday. We are being joined by the iconic interior designer, Kelly Wursler. That is taking place Wednesday, April 22nd at 5 p.m. Pacific. And finally, for the members of MasterClass who signed up for the thriller writing class discussion that's going to be following this, we can't wait to dive in deeper and keep the conversation going. Thank you to Dan once again, and thank you everybody else for joining.